turn it on. So anyway, the recording's on now. So so there's basically the way I approach this these slides is that at first I mean I've got the basic definition, the scientific, if you will, definitions of what a concept is, and then there are some attempts later on, about halfway through the slides, on integration. So first of all, I'm going to start with these the more simpler views of slide, excuse me, of concepts. So the class in philosophy, going apparently back to antiquity and Aristotle, the classical approach was just by a definition. So what's a house? You can say, well, a house is defined. This concept is defined by having rooms, doors, windows, kitchen, etc. But the shortcoming of this approach to looking at concepts is, as most of us know, in AI, AI is nothing but a bunch of different combinations, a combinatorial explosion, so yeah, and it didn't really take AI to figure that much out. It just doesn't hold up well to special cases. So moving on to the next slide. In the 70s, Eleanor Roche, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but she introduced, she's coming from the standpoint of psychology, she introduced the notion of what she called the prototype way of looking at concepts. So, and here it seems like this was the first kind of major attempt within psychology to get beyond a definition. So the concept being a kind of an average that a person can build up in his or her mind. So so a prototypical house would be a concept of all of the houses that you've looked at, and you've somehow managed to come up with an average house. Pretty simple. I mean, and that'll work, except for the average that you come up with. There might not actually be an instance of the average out in reality. So that's kind of the defect of that approach. And then associated with the prototype, prototype is the topic and the issue of typicality, which goes hand in hand with this. So when we're thinking of concepts, I mean, pretty much involved with that is if you've got some kind of concept like, of a house again, I guess I can keep using that example. Maybe that's not the best example, but well, like a shed might not be a good typical example of a house. So within the domain of this prototype concept, there's
upside down. Yeah, you're upside down.
I've only got a few people there on the screen. It sounds like I've got a child. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. Anyway, typicality. So you've got this average of house worked out, and then you can decide whether some particular instance has high prototypicality or low prototypicality. So there you have it, prototypes. So on to the next slide. And then the next major way of looking at concepts within the field of psychology being exemplars. So as you guys could probably easily gather, in this case, you just, or the person building up a concept using this scheme simply remembers all the particulars. So again, returning to houses, you'd have to remember every house. And again, these are kind of polarized ways of looking at this. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that we're doing both. I mean, we're looking at particular instances, and we're looking at a kind of an average. But these are just kind of the starting points. was just trying to refresh my memory here. So anyway, so we've covered now the definitional view, the prototypical view, and the exemplar view. And then we come to the fancy sounding theory of concepts. And this is kind of interesting. And I believe it originated from the domain of philosophy more so than psychology. And it's in this, they're advancing a kind of a holistic viewpoint of concepts. So, and Jim, when you were telling me one time there is no independent concept, I think that is kind of what they were driving at here. So we can assemble concepts in the same kind of way that a scientific theory is put together. So, any questions or issues so far from anybody? Doesn't sound like it. So far I've covered the just to go back a little bit. So concept is definition. You can define it by like a dictionary definition. A prototype where you take a kind of an average, so you create your concept from an average. then in this, the exemplars, you just build up your concept based upon a mass of instances. And then the theory where you define everything as a kind of a overall scientific theory, if you want to look at it that analysisly. So, but I think it's pretty obvious that we're not doing these in isolation, that they're pretty much all happening concurrently. So in 1999, in an influential paper by Solomon, pretty much basically that's what they were saying, that the point that I was just trying to make, that it's not just one thing that a concept happens to be doing. There's multiple functions going on, and the functions not being independent of each other, they interact and influence each other. And they in this paper, which is pretty short, and I linked to it, and pretty readable, they look at this from various perspectives, like learning. We compare an old concept to a new concept. Somebody talks to you, your concept gets updated. Depending upon the situation, you might have a more or less useful type of category. If you're reasoning, you might have a different way of looking at concepts. And an interesting passage in there about combining concepts. You can integrate, we integrate concepts, we compare them. They talk about the need, the necessity, whatever the necessity at hand is, that you might have a custom conceptual representation. And then I noted when I was looking through this that philosophy covers this under a different heading, conceptual pluralism. I mean, basically though, you know, as you guys and men and women, I shouldn't just say guys, but know that in psychology, you're more apt to get experimentation. And in philosophy, it's a lot of armchair theory or speculating. So this came from psychology mostly. So the point being that it appears to be backed up by experimentation. So I'll go on to the next slide. And then this is the paper that I pretty much tried to highlight for the meetup by Dr. Lieto. I think I pronounced him right. I've seen him on Facebook, and it's a pretty good paper. And basically, it was presented at BICA 2014, and he proposes an integration of the aforementioned types of concepts that I just discussed, and the prototype theory, again, the exemplar theory, the theory. He left out the definitional theory, which is fine with me. I like this sentence here: concepts do not constitute a unitary phenomenon, which seems to make a lot of intuitive sense to me. Lieto did not propose the proxy type theory. That was by Prinz in 2004. If I understand this correctly, and I know that some other people, including Jim, have read the paper. What Lieto is basically offering here is a structure in which a concept is pretty much built dynamically at well, if you, I mean, if at experience for, I'm thinking at runtime because my uh, uh, orientations with computers. So, and he is too, but I mean, in all of AI, we're trying to compare how the mind is working with how we can implement it, right? And so I don't know. I tend to get the two confused. It doesn't have to work the way the AI doesn't have to work the way the mind works. In fact, there's a lot of good reasons why it shouldn't. But in any case, I think I like this. Basically, what he's got is like we're working in a working. I'm thinking, yeah, in working memory, in short-term working memory. The working memory is a kind of the seat of a proxy, and so depending upon what the situation is, maybe you need an average concept, maybe you need a specific case, or maybe you need you probably need a way in the theory of concepts to combine all these things. So he's saying that working memory, there could be like a proxy that is able to assemble from long-term memory some kind of specific concept for whatever the need happens to be at hand. And Jim wrote a kind of a short digest with some of his own comments about this. Thanks, Jim. So anyway, I liked it. Any comments at this
I
point?
just wanted to add that he was saying that the type of concept that's needed for a particular situation will be called into working memory, and that'll be used as a proxy type, to the family of related concepts.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add, what struck me reading this is if you think of it backwards, it's a model of how one of the theories of memory works, where you have an experience that's in your working memory, and when that experience is stored in long-term memory, it's stored as an outline, an abstract, and then actually or a concept in this model. And then when you remember, you retrieve that construct, that concept, that outline, and reconstruct it in your working memory. So it seems to be just the reverse of this process. So I liked that it worked conceptually both directions. Had anyone ever is that theory of memory familiar to anyone? I was going to look it up before this, but I didn't get a chance.
Sounds familiar to me. I do know you do reconstruct memories every time you remember, and
that's how like planted memories can be, or memories can be planted by altering how it's reconstructed.
Yeah, and I think working memory is a dynamic process. So you're taking a memory, or you're taking memories, or whatever they are, and you're dynamically using them somehow to adapt to whatever you're trying to think about. So
that's my understanding too. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a interesting kind of new approach in machine learning by Yoshua Bengio. It's in a paper called The Consciousness Prior, and they talk a bit about like working memory and basically, well, it's a bit to go into now, but they create what's called a sparse factor graph, where it's kind of a knowledge graph that gets created based on what's currently in working memory, and that working memory gets populated by kind of the whole all of the possible states, all like in your brain. But I'll let you go further. We can talk about that later.
I mean, all the possible states, it makes sense because, I mean, that's kind of like what the theory is supposed to, I mean, anyway,
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Well, if there's no more comments on this, I think I'll move on. There was one, Eleanor Roche, who I mentioned above, was the pretty much the inventor of the prototype theory. There was I thought a really interesting a way that she seemed to have shown, and it was through experimentation again. That's the nice thing about psychology. You usually get some kind of proof, but that we seem to naturally have 3 levels of categories, and this is a hierarchical look, and I'm not. I'm just saying I saw this and I liked it because it turns out that in my AGI structure, I came up with 3 levels too, and I haven't got it all built. I've kind of got the lowest, and the next level up kind of working at this point, just barely, but the upper level I don't have. But anyway, I just thought this was interesting because what she classified as the basic level is the most important, and so, like, let's take an example like a table. So if you think of a concept table, if you just think so I've got a table in front of me, right? And the actual table would be the subordinate concept, the particular table, if I understood this correctly. The base, what she was calling the basic concept, would be like all tables, and above that, the superordinate concept would be like furniture. So really what she's saying is that most of the meaning and most of the information seems to be contained right in the middle level. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting observation, and I hadn't been aware of that. And it pertains particularly to concepts. So I guess I'll move on to the next slide. And then I don't know if Michael Miller was able to join us today, but he last year Michael gave us a presentation on his research and his cognitive architecture. He published a book. He's strongly influenced by Jean Piaget, and his book is entitled Building Minds with Patterns. So I hit him up about what Piaget would have to say about this, and I got a response, and a link to it too as well. So Piaget was, as I understand it, he was into his approach was holistic too, and he was Michael said it's Piaget said something about integration into a system of concepts. So we don't have standalone concepts under Piaget. Piaget was a structuralist too. So really, the kind of what stood out to me about this was that like a mental image being kind of an imitation. So there must be some kind of linguistic correlation, which I'm not a linguist. I didn't look up, but it sounds like image and imitation sounds kind of similar. So there's a kind of a temptation when you work with computers a lot to think that you can actually point at a concept, but I mean we never can really, right? In mind, it's always a mental representation. It's not some. So if we think of a house, there's no house. I don't have a little house in my mind. I've got a representation, right? So it's easy to start forgetting that if you work around computers too much. Well, you can point at the symbol that says house, or maybe it's stuck in a neural network somewhere. You can't. It's a little harder to see it, but anyway, the point. I guess the point is that Piaget identifies several different classifications of concept, and it as a mental image. Any comments or anything? Piaget? No. Okay. Next slide. And then another a member of this meetup, a gentleman in France offered a kind of an interesting paper that he compiled some research that he found on the internet, and looked at what Michael had written in terms of the research, and presented his findings and conclusions. And some of the things that stood out, and I linked to Philippe's paper, and again, he says internal representations are not copies of external data. So when we're thinking of a concept, it's something else. I guess it's important. I keep coming back to that, that we're dealing with a different thing, a mental representation. And most of us have studied neuroscience to some extent, and when some of the comments in here should be familiar. Some of his conclusions, like the brain seems to do a lot of its own processing, and he points out that there's top-down influences. And one point that he raised that I thought was kind of a bit contentious, and I'm not sure I totally believe, was that he thinks that two general concepts cannot be processed at the same time, concurrently. I'm not sure if I buy into that. I mean, like, if I think of, if you've been into Seattle, you may have seen the pink elephant car wash. I mean, somebody at some point had the idea of a pink elephant in a car wash. So, I mean, those are two pretty much discrete concepts, right? You got a pink elephant and you got a car wash. I think I can still kind of make an integration.
I wonder if he means like how high level, like there seems to be like whatever your current goal is, seems to be one of the highest level concepts. Maybe there can't be two general goals at the same time, but you can still be like driving and thinking about other things, but you still just have one goal per se. I mean, I guess you get multiple goals, but your actions follow. I think a primary goal. I don't know what you guys think.
I think we deal with many concepts at once, but it may not be conscious or something like that.
Yeah, that's why I say maybe one conscious and multiple unconscious modules probably being activated. Thinking about, I mean, things pop up from just, you remember something after, a day or so, and it just comes up. I mean, I kind of think that might be like in a cycle somewhere. I mean, how does that pop up? It's not out of nowhere. It must be somewhere in the continuous in the unconscious.
But the key in that bullet is consciously process. So like if you're driving and you're thinking about your shopping list for the store, at some point you've driven enough in your life that it almost becomes an unconscious task. We don't really, I mean, we've all driven like to work or, somewhere in you think back and I don't remember driving the last 10 miles, so you're obviously, your body, you're driving responsibly, but consciously in terms of it occupying your attention, there's a little different state of that. I'm resisting saying unconscious driving, but that automatic driving versus the conscious intentional thinking about a task, like the grocery store list or something like that.
It almost seems like the more familiar you are with something, the more unconscious.
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
playing ping pong, when you first start, you're very conscious about it, but after a while it becomes almost all unconscious.
Right. Or, playing piano or something like that. It's very hard at the beginning, but over practice, it becomes unconscious physical activity. So then your conscious can focus on higher levels of that activity. But that's the way I read that, is that you can't be thinking about your shopping list and a work problem simultaneously. You're gonna flip between them. it's like classic multitasking in a single, computer. There's only one thing being done. It's just switching back and forth. It appears to be multitasking, but really it's only working on one task at a time.
Yeah, especially when it goes into like sub-vocalizations. I need to go to the store.
Exactly. Yeah.
It
Like
certainly is. It seems like it's more productive to only have one concept that you're really conscious of, because if your mind is going from one concept to another too fast, excuse me, it's not so good. So our motivation here is for AI. So it's something to keep in mind, to try to just have one.
Yeah, task switching is really, to me anyway, it becomes a very interesting subject. When I meditate, then ocular dominance is a primary thing I think about. I look at. I'm looking at something. Is my right eye dominant or my left eye dominant? And can I switch between them? And can I keep them both at the same time? So, the ocular dominance is a good prototype of task switching, having two concepts in your mind at the same time.
And also it kind of depends how you count the concept. Like for memory, you can have about like 7 plus or minus 2 things in memory. If I drop the ball, it'll land on the floor. I'm thinking of the ball, the floor, and it's a statement. That's true with high degree of probability. And all those things are kind of in your working memory. All those, I guess, I don't know, maybe sub-concept, ball, floor, but it kind of builds onto one uber concept.
Right. It seems like we're kind of crippled a little bit because, again, we can't. It's hard to point at a concept. We're trying to say you can't have two general concepts, but we're not even really sure what one is. So it depends how we define it, what a concept is, as far as whether you can have two at once or not. So anyway.
I'm trying to be a little bit meta from the 7 plus or minus 2 kind of concept. The notion being that an individual concept might have 7 plus or minus 2 sub-concepts, but then something comes into the mind, and you want to switch over to that, and a third set of 7 plus or minus 2 comes in. And so there's sort of a dominance war that goes on. Which do you tend to? Or what is the center of your consciousness?
Yeah, it seems like it's always switching up.
Mm-hmm. And what the process of that switching up is, I think is.
Yeah, that's what Bengio's consciousness prior talks a lot about, is where, what's in the working memory really influences the lower level. So he talks about like system 1 versus system 2 thinking.
Exactly.
Kahneman's, what is it? I forget the name of it.
I think that's the system 2 is like a tennis player. At some point over practice, we become so accomplished it goes to. Well, I forget the system. Which one or 2?
It's the quick recognition.
Okay. Yeah.
And system 2 is conscious.
Okay.
I think, does that go under the banner of dual process?
I'm not sure.
Seems like everybody at BICA was talking about the dual process. So you've got the kind of the immediate information and the more cerebral thinking process.
Yeah, I think there's tons of unconscious modules and those are all system 1, and they're and kind of the system 2 kind of selects from all those what to focus on, and once it's focused on a few of those, a very small subset, tiny subset, and that influences everything from the very lowest. So like if you're focused, you know, like the first layer of visual cortex, most of the connections are from higher level because it focuses your attention, the sensory attention. I think comes from
Yeah. That sounds right.
Who was the source of that system 1, system 2 thinking?
Well, that was Daniel Kahneman's
Oh, okay, that was
fast and slow thinking.
Yeah, I couldn't think of him.
Daniel Kahneman actually points out that it's like abstraction of these, like the systems aren't actually in the brain, they are just the models of how you model the thinking. So there's no actual system 1 and actual system 2. There's like these are ideas that help us to understand our thinking, and they are like psychological concepts and models. So
sure, but there's there's some way the brain does it. Like I think part of it is that just the firing rate of neurons, you know, certain areas just fire a lot faster and are much more active. And I think those are the ones that basically what we're attending to, what's in the working memory, those areas are more active. That's what I've heard.
Okay. Moving on here, one of the long-standing debates, and this probably not going to strike anybody as new, is how much are concepts innate, and how much do we just how much can we attribute to just sensations? So I put this in here because it's good to be aware of within the context of concepts. Excuse me. So we can argue about that. Personally, I think it's both. I mean, so I think we do have some capacity for concepts. There's some structures that we do appear to be born with, I think, and then obviously we gain some from experience. So that's the pretty much the good old innate versus you know, through experience debate. The next slide. And Colin Hales, who last year gave us a really interesting presentation on his work in neuroscience, and he's got it seems radical when you just hear about it, but then once you read about it, it doesn't seem as radical. His theory of AI basically being that there's really should not be a fake AI that or a fake intelligence. Really the way to approach this is just simply to try to recreate the mind itself by different means than the brain, but the result being thought. So now's not the time to go into Colin's work, but I asked him what he thought about concepts, and basically he made a really interesting short argument, which I posted here, to the extent of which is that he mentions that the brain is pretty much runs off associative memory. So I had to refresh my memory, my memory of the definition of that, and associative memory being how you form a concept of two unrelated items. So he's basically Colin was saying that a concept is merely just a lookup key like any other word that doesn't really yield anything in particularly special, but that concepts are really kind of what emerges from a mass of associative memory connections in the brain. So that was basically his take on it, which I thought, I tried to look at this from the standpoint of psychology and philosophy and neuroscience. So we could kind of correlate these different disciplines and, and try to come to our own conclusion. So, again, I kind of hit up people that I knew. So it's kind of, my take on this is kind of slanted towards my own experiences. So I'll move on to the next slide. And then again, Philip of France wrote another paper under the topic again of neuroscience. He's interested in bees, and this paper I thought was he basically cobbled together some research from bee researchers that effectively showed that bees with their little brain can really learn effectively abstract concepts. And I suppose every concept is abstract, but like they showed the bee could get the difference between above and below, same and different. And it's a kind of an entertaining paper too, I have to say. I enjoyed it. So it's just a short read. And really he's basically arguing that, well, the bee has a little brain, but so what? Let's start with something small. Anyway, on to the next slide, which brings us to the end. I probably a lot of you have heard of I read Garden Ford's like 20 years ago, Conceptual Spaces, where it's an attempt to link symbolic and connectionist approaches with geometry in the middle. And so that's something else can be looked at. Conceptual blending is another topic I've heard about, and I've seen some work. I know I've seen it. I tried to find it in some of my AGI proceedings. I don't have them all, but there are some attempts there to, well, what it sounds like, conceptual blending. So that basically, that's the end of my my slides. So I looked, I went through the basic definitions of concepts, the historical ones. I looked at philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. I tried to, I thought that paper from Lieto was kind of got close to being able to integrate things, but these are some big issues, and there's a lot of things to think about.